Hello, this is Beth Friedman, Senior Partner at Fin Partners. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and today we are on Fin Partners talking about positive patient experiences. I'm Beth Friedman.
I'm Joe Foster.
And this
is Fin Voices.
Today on Fin Voices, we talk with Robin Ntoh, VP of Aesthetics at Nextech. Nextech's a healthcare tech company focused on dermatology, ophthalmology, plastic surgery, and medspa. And Robin is a widely sought-after speaker, educator, and podcaster in these specialties. Robin has 35 years experience in business and executive leadership. She's also a dedicated advocate for us women in health IT. Our conversation today looks at the commonalities of better patient experiences across all types of practices and the healthcare industry as a whole. We're all patients and we all want a better experience, and the improvements are possible. So I'm super excited to have Robin on the show. Robin, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Beth. Thank you. And I'm super honored to be here today and to join your podcast.
Super happy to have you as well. Your background is really unique. I'm a health IT woman in health IT, so I've been through a lot of the technology as part of my career, but always on the hospital and health system side. I'm super curious. Tell me about your background as you've become a health technology expert in the medical specialty side.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We never really understand the path that we take or the journey that we have in life. And mine started many years ago in an ENT facial plastic surgery allergy office. And I worked myself up from, all different positions in the practice, eventually managing the practice, and really gaining the understanding of the internal workings of a medical practice that had incorporated aesthetics, the true source of any type of, non-surgical and surgical cosmetic arena that is positioned itself when it pairs itself with different medical specialties. And then beyond that, I went to work for a specific IT company, which gave me that experience working within these practices, but looking at a broader approach to the problems that they were trying to solve and how software actually was solving that for them. And I worked for a company that was really focused specifically on how they converted patients in using photography and morphine solutions to actually show patients what they could expect from their surgical experience. That then evolved into me launching my own consulting business. And, there was a time when this niche area of the industry in aesthetics was really just starting to blossom. And there was this understanding and need for how do I actually incorporate that good common patient experience with the retail healthcare? And how do I maintain that patient experience? And so a lot of work went into working with practices, really understand that patient journey and build a high-performing team that actually developed into a very efficient, high-performing practice. And then what happened is, years later in my career, I was approached by Nextech, and Nextech wanted to really look at how they could take their existing clients and really help them evolve what their needs were in their use of the software and how that related back to their practice. So we launched consulting services for Nextech, and we took that to another level where we actually said, hey, you've got these tools. How do I best use these tools to actually help me manage my practice and build a much more higher performing practice? So, after many, many years of working in those different arenas, not just within the practice, but also in the technology side of it, as well as also then working for the software company, launching those consulting services, especially for something like Nextech that's highly specific in aesthetics, it really was more like a trifecta that evolved into a very unique niche type of position.
Yeah, not to mention you're owning your own consulting firm. So congratulations on that too. So really you all are touching on all aspects. And I think that I just looked at a Chime survey from last year, actually, but one of the top things that hospital IT folks want to do is optimize the technology they currently have. And it sounds like same for the medical specialty practices you work with. They want to make the most of their investment. And certainly having that consulting arm helps at every juncture of that.
Well, it's really true. If you think about it, a lot of practices, they go through the initial implementation. So they purchase a product, they either do courses online, or they have a person that actually comes into the practice and does the training. But if you think about it, they remember a small percentage of that. They remember the things they have to do that day. And many times the bells and whistles, those additional features that they actually, saw during their demonstration, the things that were going to help them grow or scale their business, they forget about some of those tools, and they forget about them to the point where they think that the tools don't even exist sometimes. So it's always been fascinating to me to see where technology is part of our everyday lives. Think about an iPhone, or your smartphone, your device. How much of it do we really understand and use well? And so a lot of times the technology is right there in front of us. We're just not using it to actually take our practices or our business to the next level. So
Yeah.
it was an opportunity for us to really think about, well, how do we help our practices? And consulting was a perfect fit for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Really using those additional bells and whistles. I like how you put that, to make sure you're achieving what you want to achieve with the technology. Let's focus in on the bells and whistles related to patient experience. So you just spoke a few months ago, I guess, at the Vegas Cosmetic Surgery and Aesthetic Dermatology Conference on what are the KPIs, key performance indicators, of really running an aesthetics practice. And one of them, just like pretty much every other provider, is patient experience. So tell me a little bit about the event. And then what are the specific KPIs that those types of practices are measuring as it relates to patient experience?
Yeah, great question. Well, first, this is a conference that's been around for more than a decade. And it was the first conference that really brought together multiple specialties that really were focused on the business of aesthetics or retail healthcare. So you have med spas, you have plastic surgery practices, facial plastic surgery practices, you'll have dermatology practices, but they all have a common denominator, which is they have some component of their business that's focused on aesthetics. And so that retail healthcare business is very different than how you're dealing with that standard, everyday, medical type of patient. So this is the type of patient that's actually being cultivated and converted and hopefully eventually retained as a long-time patient within your practice. So the way that they think about things and the way that they manage this patient experience can be very different than the way that they manage their medical practices. And so this has been one of those meetings that has blossomed over the years. In fact, there's many meetings now that do approach this multi-specialty type of perspective, especially as it relates to aesthetics. There's a lot of meetings out there that are doing this, and I find the audience is very intrigued and eager to learn about the different ways that they can really embrace and understand that patient journey and really harness what they need to actually expand and differentiate. And we think about this in a lot of different ways, especially around KPIs, which is one of those things that's a hot topic today. People are starting to think about their business, and in aesthetics, they're starting to think about how they measure their success or their outcomes. And what better way to do it than to start thinking about, what are the tools that I'm using to measure it, and what am I doing? What are the right things to measure?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Can you give me some examples? Like, what are some specific patient experience KPIs that folks should be looking at?
Well, probably one of the most important ones is the patient experience comes back to, what does the patient say about you? So do you survey your patients when they leave, whether it's just their first visit or maybe it's after, on a quarterly basis, or after they've seen a new provider within your practice, or maybe they've had a new type of service within your practice. So those patient surveys, believe it or not, tried and true, are very important to your practice. Another thing to think about is patients need a forum to talk about their service, talk about their experience. And if you provide that in a survey format, then you're allowing that patient to vent, perhaps, provide some feedback that is not altogether that great about their experience, but you at least gave them opportunity there versus them finding another avenue where they can actually provide that information that is not as masked and more present out there in the open arena for more people to find. So think about those patient rating sites. You don't want your patients going there first. You would much rather try to handle the situation or their experience more delicately. And so the surveys are a really great way to think about how you measure your patient experience.
That makes sense. Like, I think about it was a cardiologist, but I had a recent really bad experience, and I'm a healthcare person, right? So I'm usually pretty patient with the healthcare workers and staffs at any kind of practice. And you're right. And shame on me, really, Robin, but I went to Facebook and said, oh my gosh, don't go to this practice, right? And, that could have probably been mitigated, my sharing of that bad experience. If they would have sent me a survey, I would have said it in the survey, and then they would have followed up, right? So I think that's what you're getting to is let's be proactive with getting that feedback.
Yeah, and I also think about it a couple of different ways. The positive information is also very helpful for encouraging your team, your staff to know where they've actually done a great job. It's a great way to really, give them the kudos that they deserve. And people want to feel like they've been involved, or they've really helped a patient come along, or they've provided a good experience. And so I think that those are really healthy when you're trying to cultivate a good team experience within your practice. I had a similar experience in my orthopedic surgeon's practice. And, I went into this from my world, my perspective. I had been working behind the scenes with the staff and coaching and teaching and training and helping them understanding how to understand to really provide that experience. But I wouldn't have expected it from my orthopedic surgeon's practice because I don't see them thinking about this the way that I would expect it from an aesthetics arena. Again, a different type of practice. It's a medical practice versus an aesthetics practice, not that retail healthcare. But yet, I find it's just as important because people can have bad experiences regardless of the specialty. But they did something really unique, which I was like, so impressed. I was like, wow, who did your training? Who trained you guys on this? Where did you learn this? Because they actually put comment cards right at the checkout desk and as well as a check-in, so that at any stage of my journey through that visit, I could easily pick something up and make a comment and drop it in the box. And it was either kudos given or it was a complaint that I may have had. But again, they gave me an opportunity to actually share my experience, good or bad.
That sounds fabulous, actually. And just encouraging that feedback is super important. Let's talk about the one point that I know is a good metric also is referrals, right? So are your patients referring new patients to you? And that sounds like a really important thing to measure as well. And probably much more important in the aesthetics business than the other medical specialties, as you mentioned. The other specialties, the patients kind of are prescribed to go there by their primary care provider or their insurance company, where this one, they really have a choice.
Yeah, you really bring up one of the primary areas that we have to think about. A lot of times over the years, we go back and we measure what are your top referral sources. And the common ones year over year, no matter what the practice type is, it's always have been patients, physicians, and the web. Of course, now we've got the growing area of social media. We'll tuck that aside for a minute and let's just focus on patient referrals. Patient referrals are one of the highest recommendations and one of the highest indicators of a successful practice. What better way for a patient to come to your practice that's been referred from a patient that's had a good experience? And there's so many different ways that you can execute on this within your practice. But just measuring it first and foremost is probably the most important thing. How many patients are you getting that are referred by existing patients? And then you can even take it to another level. Practices that measure it not just overall holistically, but then break it down and look at it like, okay, well, let me look at that per provider. What type of referrals am I getting for this provider? Am I getting a high number of patient referrals? And that's an indicator to you where you might have opportunity to work with that provider because maybe they're not getting as many patient referrals as you would expect or you would see. And there's opportunity to potentially coach and work with them and identify where there's some, potential issues that might be budding that you wouldn't want to know about. But the point is you would never know if you hadn't started with just measuring that information. I think another thing that's important to note is it goes hand in hand with retention. If patients are referring to you, those patients are in general coming back to you, which is another really good KPI for practices to measure, is am I retaining my patients? So are they referring and am I retaining them? Those are two very strong KPIs that are very important benchmarks that indicate a healthy practice.
Let's talk about retail for a minute. You've been kind of talking about this is more of a retail side, a consumer side of healthcare that we're talking about today. In retail, always the lesson is it costs way less to keep a customer than get a new customer. Sounds like the same for these practices. So I assume that if they can meet some of those KPIs on retention as well as referral, their marketing costs could be potentially lower.
Most definitely. On average, it costs 7 to 8 times more to acquire a new patient than to retain an existing patient. And so you're absolutely dead right. Your margins improve dramatically if you're really focusing on retaining patients. And a lot of times practices just don't put the effort into understanding what is a retention. They'll anecdotally think that they're retaining their patients, but until they really drill down and look at the numbers, they don't understand that they're not actually retaining them. And in today's society, when there's the generational impact and there's the different ways that you market to patients, think about social media and the different ways that patients are, compelled to try different services or maybe even try different providers. These are the things that really can pull down your retention of your patients. And so you want to be focused on those things. First and foremost, am I retaining? And then secondarily to that, am I retaining them across my base as a provider, as based upon procedures? Am I also retaining them maybe holistically? Am I cross-selling them across the practice?
Makes sense. What you're talking about here, it sounds to me like really that white glove customer service. Can you give us just a few examples of in those patient interactions, kind of what that looks like?
I think a lot of it starts with just thinking about the way that you represent and talk to the patients. Think about when a patient approaches a practice and they walk into the waiting room and the person at the front desk gives them that really healthy, great greeting and smiles and is enthusiastic and pays attention to them and greets them and offers them a beverage or, makes sure that they're catering to them and really showing them that they are excited that they're there in their practice and that they have actually chosen your practice versus the patient that enters a practice and they stand at the front desk and wait 2 to 3 to 4 minutes to be acknowledged while the person at the front desk is finishing a conversation with their coworker, maybe perhaps even talking about another patient, which we don't want to have happen. That may not seem like that's significant to a patient, but that is a big deal to these patients. That really does not represent very well at all. Patients take note of those small little details.
The small details of the good people skills, right?
Oh, most definitely. The soft skills, the way you talk to them, the way that you actually represent your business to them, just in the appearance of your waiting room. That's another great way to actually give that white glove experience. Offering them a beverage, making sure that if the physician's running late or the provider's running late, that you acknowledge it and you offer them some sort of condolence because of it. Those are the things that are the small nuances that are different. Think about the Ritz-Carlton difference. I mean, people talk about it, but it's so true. When you go into a Ritz-Carlton or a very high-end hotel, there's a difference in how they approach their guests, and it's apparent in how they actually retain those customers because of the way that they do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would think a lot of this relies on training that front office, front desk staff effectively. That's part of it, I'm sure. But I'm sure also just hiring for the right, not even skill set in this case, right? Sort of the right personality and the right type of person becomes probably really important.
Most definitely. You want to think about, before you even really start the hiring process, what is the profile of the type of person that you want at your front desk? Do they need to be able to cross-sell, upsell, educate? What kind of customer service skills do they need to have? You really want to understand what that profile is before you even start the actual hiring process. And after you actually put them in the seat, you've hired the person, you really need to focus on that continuation of education, constantly making sure that the ever-evolving landscape of aesthetics or whatever your practice may be, that you're constantly ensuring that those staff members are educated on new treatments, new procedures, new products, new services, as well as keeping up on the trends and what's going on. And sometimes you even want to script them. Scripting your staff is not harsh, but in the reality of what's going on in today's environment, it is much better to provide them how to respond versus leaving it up for them to create their own narrative. Giving them the ability to say, okay, this is my scenario, this is the situation, this is the appropriate response, this is how you should handle it. It's scripting and then actually having them do some role playing and actually having them learn how to do that with each other really does set them up for success. And most importantly, what it does is those small indicators are going to be the things that differentiate you as a practice. And differentiation is key in today's very competitive landscape.
Agreed. We've talked about the initial greeting, the sort of the positive feedback, things like that. But I would assume one of the toughest things for office staff is when the patient has a complaint. Whether it was what I had, right, which nobody even asked me, so I just walked out. Whether it's a patient complaining about a bill, that would really be helpful, I would think, where you've got some scripts that, to your point, the staff knows, they practice, and they practice on each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple as, what's my SOP? What is my operating procedure, my process for a patient that comes in that's complaining, that's very upset and they're vocal, and there's a waiting room full of patients? What's my process? Arm your staff with the tools, because it's going to happen, and you don't want to leave it up to them to make it up. And start small. Take your top 5 situations, good and bad, and you teach your staff how to handle it. I think another really good common one that I hear about in practices a lot is, people don't necessarily want to provide credit cards for deposits. Well, it's very common today in these aesthetic practices to collect credit card deposits. And so they get, the patients want to, give them, they want to press back. They want to say, no, I don't want to do that. It's arming your staff with the right way to respond to that so that they get a positive response from the patient. Those are the things that make a difference.
Nextech is a specialty EHR solution for ophthalmology, dermatology, plastic surgery, and medspa. Our platform simplifies medical practice management and gives your team the software they need to deliver a top-notch patient experience every time. Specialty practices need solutions that stay ahead of the curve, now and in the future. Discover how Nextech can help you reach your practice goals at nextech.com.
This is Beth Friedman with Fin Partners. You're on Fin Voices, and we are back with Robin Ntoh, VP of Aesthetics at Nextech. And we're talking about the patient experience. What can we learn from retail and the aesthetics practices in healthcare that we can apply to other medical practices and specialties? So let's talk about something, Robin, that we haven't chatted about yet. And that's really before the patient even gets to the office. So that whole scheduling, calling into the practice, trying to make an appointment. Now a lot of people go online and they hit up against chatbots. I still call and I get caught sometimes in that really just down spiraling cycle of, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. What can we do better when it comes to either online on the practice's portal or website, or in these phone triage systems? What can we do better really to improve that patient experience?
Well, I think you start with the basics. What are the things that are available to you today? And then you expand upon that with technology and several of the new offerings that are out there, thinking AI and chatbots, et cetera. But start with the basics. Do you even offer online scheduling? Do you have a type of texting service available that provides your patients opportunity to communicate with you in an easier format, more convenient? I refer back to generational differences, because when we only provide one way that's inconvenient to different people to actually communicate or to connect with the practice, then we basically are excluding part of our potential prospects or customers. And so start with the things that are really, basic. Start with online scheduling. How often do people go through their heavy work day, especially during post-COVID, when people are still working in, remote circumstances, and they go from meeting to meeting, and they generally don't necessarily have those breaks that allow them to call and make those necessary appointments. And then it's 6:00 at night and they've realized they haven't made their follow-up appointment with their dentist or their dermatologist or their ophthalmologist or their Botox appointment. And they're frustrated because they've once again forgot to do that. But the practice that offers that online scheduling component, that's going to be their first step in being more convenient and offering that back to their patients.
Absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned that. I write like a little one pager here. I handwrite all my things I must do this week, right? It's a combination of personal and work things. And I have had 2 doctor's appointments on there for at least 3 weeks. So,
Common.
I hear exactly.
It's frustrating.
Maybe what I should do, instead of having the phone number and trying to set aside time to call them, I just go to the website, right? Give it a try.
In reality, it's actually becoming a differentiator. There are people that are actually moving to new practices, finding different doctors because of the convenience. They want the convenience of what is going to work best for them.
Yeah, I find the texting is very, very convenient. I really like that. And then, of course, I get frustrated when it doesn't understand what I'm trying to tell it. But I do like that quite a bit. All right, let's shift. Let's talk about another new use of technology. And you mentioned AI a few minutes ago. And I am a former medical record coder, so clinical documentation is near and dear to my heart. The big EHR vendors are making announcements. There's 2 major industry initiatives right now pushing for responsible use of AI in healthcare, CHI and Train. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in your niche as it relates to AI to support documentation?
Yeah, it's very interesting because we've taken a very interesting approach to how we look at how we solve problems for our practices. And obviously AI is the big buzzword right now. And what are you going to do with it? And how are you going to approach it? And what we found as a business is that there's a lot of things that we can do, but what are the right things? What are going to have the biggest impact? But what are also going to fall within those safe guidelines that we may or may not even be aware of yet? Thinking about that responsible use of AI, because it's still the wild, wild west, because it's just brand new and we're still learning. And it's going to evolve and it's going to change and regulations are going to come into play. So we're thinking about this from a more conservative approach and thinking about what is going to work best for the provider. So we're testing some different things, but we think about things like what are things that will help our staff within the charting experience ensure that they're collecting the right information and they're not over collecting, and ensuring that it's still providing the physician the autonomy to be able to do the coding and do the medical decision making that they should be doing. Because if we go into this just assuming that AI is going to do it all, then we're actually going at this the wrong way. Our approach is not correct, because physicians at the end of the day are still the ones that have to make the decisions. They're the ones who will actually be taking that patient through that visit and recording that information. It's how we incorporate AI into the actual documentation. And a lot of things that we're learning is that during that initial workup where the medical assistant or the nurse may be collecting medical history, there's a lot that can be done there with AI that we're finding is very helpful with our practices. We're also finding where sometimes AI can be listening in the background and collecting information, and you can train it to collect only the medical information and not necessarily that common anecdotal conversation. Well, that may be very true in certain specialties, but in the aesthetics arena, some of that anecdotal conversation is important because it's contextual to treatments and plans and what the providers and the patient can actually agree upon. So it's very specific to the type of specialty, but it's also specific to the needs and the problems that we're trying to solve.
It's exciting for me to hear that what I think I heard you say was ambient voice is able to, you're able to sort of train it to pull the parts of the patient physician conversation that you want it to and ignore others and vice versa. So that really does sound pretty exciting.
It is exciting. We're actually testing it out now, and it's exciting to see where it actually takes the information, positions it in the EMR documentation in the correct format, and it's exciting. But again, it's a new horizon out there, so it's a lot of learnings as a business to ensure that we're actually methodical and thoughtful in how we innovate.
Absolutely. So, Robin, thank you. We're at the end of our podcast, but I do want to wrap up with a final question for you. Any other learnings from your experience working with med spa and other specialties that other providers can learn from as far as creating those better patient experience? Anything we didn't talk about or that you want to add before we sign off?
I think one of the most important things that we overlook in how we approach not just our patients, but also our staff, is that there's more than one generation that we're actually catering and caring for today. And practices that understand and embrace those differences are actually going to find themselves a much higher performing and efficient practice. And those are the key differentiators and what make the businesses successful.
Love that. Excellent. I want to thank you for being on Fin Voices today. You can reach Robin on LinkedIn, Robin Ntoh, that's Ntoh, or check out her podcast, Aesthetically Speaking. You can also learn more about Nextech at nextech.com. So, Robin, I just want to say thank you.
Beth, that was great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast today. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Fin Voices. And Beth Friedman, I'm senior partner at Fin Partners, based in Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you for joining Fin Voices, where we talk about healthcare technology, healthcare innovation, and everything in between.